In high-performing corporate environments, pushing through fatigue is frequently celebrated as a mark of dedication. But biologically, electing to operate on minimal rest is a deliberate degradation of executive cognitive function. This cognitive deficit scales into a macroeconomic liability. A study by the Rand Corporation sought to quantify the exact financial drain chronic sleep deficiency takes on national productivity. This table maps out their findings. Looking at the data for the United States, we see an annual economic loss of $411 billion. That accounts for 2.28% of the country's gross domestic product, lost to performance stops, safety errors, and healthcare claims. To understand the origin of that macro-level loss, we have to isolate the individual operator. When an executive extends their wakefulness to meet the demands of a relentless schedule, their neural function progressively shuts down. This dual gauge illustrates the rate of decay. Operating after 17 to 19 hours of continuous wakefulness impairs cognitive performance to the equivalent of a 0.05 blood alcohol concentration. At 24 hours, neural function drops to a level equivalent to a 0.10 BAC. When a leader attempts to make high-stakes strategic decisions in this state, they are biologically equivalent to an operator who is legally drunk. Recognizing this drop in capacity, high performers have turned to consumer sleep technology, wearable rings, straps, and smartwatches, to mathematically optimize their recovery. Trying to solve a biological deficit by tracking health data has created a new problem. Instead of restoring cognitive capacity, heavy reliance on these trackers has triggered an algorithmic hijack, a behavioral loop that accelerates the physiological collapse it was meant to prevent. Sleep is an active, metabolically restorative process coordinated by the central nervous system. Chronic restriction creates a systemic crisis identical to a continuous denial of service attack on corporate infrastructure, targeting the master circadian clock in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. Because the SCN coordinates the timing mechanisms for roughly 40% of the human genome, destabilizing it triggers immediate systemic endocrine desynchronization. Normally, the body's satiety and hunger pathways are balanced, but with sleep debt, leptin synthesis stops. The satiety signal fails, leaving the brain blind to saturated caloric reserves. Simultaneously, the stomach oversecretes ghrelin, aggressively targeting the limbic system to drive intense hunger. This hormonal inversion tricks the central nervous system into perceiving a severe energy deficit. To conserve resources, the brain depresses metabolic activity and downregulates executive control in the prefrontal cortex. Simultaneously, the amygdala and the dopaminergic reward networks hypersensitize. Without prefrontal impulse control, these reward centers drive intense cravings for energy-dense, high-sugar, and ultra-processed foods. This weight gain is the direct result of an active biological deception that initiates a full metabolic collapse. We can see the clinical reality of this neuroendocrine disruption in long-term health data. In the 18-year Nurses' Health Study, which tracked over 70,000 participants, researchers documented that individuals sleeping fewer than 6 hours per night regularly gained far more weight over the 18-year horizon compared to their peers. The ultimate clinical model of this metabolic collapse is obstructive sleep apnea. Here, repeated airway collapse triggers microarousals, preventing the brain from reaching deep sleep. A continuous positive airway pressure machine stabilizes the sleep architecture. By allowing the brain to achieve continuous rest, the intervention physically resolves the hormonal disruption. Stabilizing the biology allows severely overweight individuals to successfully lose weight that was previously biologically impossible to shed.
To avoid this metabolic trap, driven operators try to manage their rest, but by outsourcing their physical awareness to proprietary machine learning algorithms, they introduce a software glitch into their own biology. This pursuit of data has introduced a psychiatric phenomenon known as orthosomnia. It is defined as an unhealthy, rigid obsession with achieving perfect sleep metrics as dictated by a consumer device. The danger lies in the illusion of precision. While consumer wearables are reliable at estimating total sleep time, their classification of distinct stages, like REM versus deep sleep, often departs significantly from clinical gold standards. This inaccuracy easily becomes pathological. In one clinical case, a 27-year-old female patient presented with chronic fatigue and sleep anxiety, convinced her sleep was fragmented based entirely on her tracker data. This split screen illustrates the disconnect.
When doctors evaluated her in a lab using clinical polysomnography, her results on the left showed completely normal sleep architecture and high percentages of deep sleep. But her device on the right presented a fractured, alarming narrative. Despite this objective proof, the patient rejected the specialist's reassurance. She believed the proprietary algorithm on her wrist was more accurate than medical instrumentation. This phenomenon is documented by the Bergen Orthosomnia scale, shown here. The scale evaluates dimensions of interference and rigidity, showing high correlation with traits like neuroticism and obsessive-compulsive disorder. By converting a biological process into a gamified suite of metrics, the tool designed to monitor sleep destroys the user's ability to intuitively achieve it. The psychological toll of sleep tracking is driven by a mechanism called the Algorithmic Nocebo Effect. The nocebo effect is the physical manifestation of negative expectation. For a wearable user, it initiates the exact second they check their morning data. An executive wakes up refreshed, but checks their device to find a low readiness score of 55. This visual signal hits the limbic system. Interpreting it as a stressor, the amygdala triggers the HPA axis, prompting a rapid release of cortisol and adrenaline. This surge in stress hormones shifts the nervous system into high alert. The immediate stress response directly lowers heart rate variability, or HRV. Ironically, panicking over a bad score degrades the very autonomic metrics the device uses as a proxy for recovery. The anxiety induced by an inaccurate data point degrades the autonomic metrics for the rest of the day. The algorithm forces the biology to conform to its negative prediction. High performers must treat their central nervous system with the exact same defensive architecture they apply to critical corporate infrastructure. The first mitigation protocol is establishing a strict 15 to 30-minute offline buffer immediately upon waking. Before looking at a device, operators must prioritize an internal, subjective body scan to rate their physical energy. This breaks the algorithmic nocebo loop and rebuilds biological self-awareness. The second protocol requires shifting from reactive daily monitoring towards strategic trend analysis. Daily physiological data is highly noisy. To extract an actual signal, you have to evaluate sleep metrics using exclusively a 7-day rolling average. This smoothing process filters out acute temporary noise, like a late-night meal, preventing an unwarranted daily panic response. Finally, users must align their environment with circadian mechanisms. That means removing ambient device light, implementing wearable-free blind weekends to reset the HPA axis and reduce the neurological dependency on the tracker. Optimizing true cognitive capacity requires protecting the biological hardware from the quantification trap. Real performance comes from mastering the underlying physiology rather than serving an arbitrary digital score.